available on our after. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to ask in the chat or the Q&A box. They'll be addressed once the presentation is over. If you can't connect to the webinar or the audio portion cuts out, let me know, or try reconnecting using the instructions provided in the email. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Brian.
Thank you. Avi mentioned the topic for today is the measure of success, key measure for monitoring content quality. It's actually the third in a series of topics that we've been covering for the last couple of months. Toward the end of last year, we got together and we looked at a couple of topics that really seemed to be impacting that we were working with, trying to adopt XML structured writing and DITA in particular. And we carved out three topics that seemed to come up over and over again. First topic that we talked about in February was to help people, once they particularly understood how DITA could help their environment, but when it came down to purchasing software and getting resources internally and formalizing a project to shift from, let's say, a frame-based environment over to XML, technical writers, technical communication managers were having problems. So focused our first presentation on that. Second, wishing more into, well, once you have a project approved, there's a whole series of implement details, and just because a small group of people understood what XML-based structured writing and single-source publishing could do, it doesn't mean that you weren't going to encounter some impediments as you started the implementation. And that leads to another topic that's coming up. It's for people that are a little bit further on in the process. They've already worked through getting a project approved. They've already worked through agreeing on a structured model. DITA is very common now, but they've been working in the environment for some time, and they're seeing that there's new ways of accessing and monitoring the content quality now that it's in XML. And one was the forethought in terms of what the project was meant to accomplish, but once you have this repository of XML content, there's new ways that you can monitor it, look at the quality. You can determine how quickly you're moving through your content. All three of these are going to be available on both the Just Systems website and Dakota Systems website. As Avi mentioned before, anyone who signed up for this webinar will get a direct email where they can let the other two are available as well. So we have an hour today, and in this time, we want to go through a brief introduction, but then look at the current state of content monitoring. What's being looked at in terms of time and cost, and actually the quality of content that's going out. And that's leads this question where everyone talks about monitoring content, looking at metrics of DITA, but there's no clear definition of what a high quality technical publications content is and how to measure it. So we'll look at just the definition and jump into the meat of looking at some key metrics that we've been using internally for our own internal documentation set. And if you have these metrics, they can write into all these different visualization techniques to help you monitor. What's exciting about the last two pieces is we're going to introduce some things that work us really a new area since, and we'll get into this in a little bit more detail, since right now you're starting to see large volumes of XML content emerging and getting ways into ways of querying it, and a lot of it has to do with XML-based indexing and running XQueries against this data set that even if you've been working with HTML and XML for many years, you might not have had access to it the way that you do now. Avi mentioned, if you have questions, I'd encourage you to either use a chat or, I'd prefer probably the Q&A box off to the side. Although I might address them at the end, I'd encourage you to ask them as we're talking about the topic. As you can imagine, if you're interested in a particular topic or you're questioning a certain slide, chances are other people are as well. So feel free to enter in the question and answer, all right, the question. going through the slide, and if we have time and it seems relevant, I'll interject it as we go forward. Quick introduction. My name is Brian Bewley. I work for a company called Dakota. We've been around since 1999, really focusing on stringing together technical publication solutions. We work with a lot of great companies out there for XML editing. Just Systems really falls into that category. There's content management software that's great for managing the XML that you're building, and then there's lots of different publishing software out there to get PDFs out, XSLT to get websites, and even emerging technology for and other mobile devices. But just selecting the suite of technology that will work for you is really only half the battle. There's a ton of work to convert the content, train your people to write in structured writing tools, and then string the technologies together. And that's really where we help out. We've been working in this, as I said before, for some time, and what's shifted over the last couple of years, maybe going 7, 8 years, is we moved from providing these technical publications software to other companies, actually using them internally, either to manage our internal training base and manage our own internal documentation, or oftentimes people are asking us to manage the operational support and hosting of technical publication systems that we deliver. So unlike some of the other presentations, these metrics have been used internally as we look at the quality of the content that we write, because we're seeing, working with technical publication groups, we have to be good at technology, but then we also have to be good with our own technical publications. So although there's a slant towards DITA, almost everything that we're talking about in terms of monitoring the content and some of these XQueries and the metrics that we come up with relate to any type of XML-based schema that you could be using. The core audience is around heavy manufacturing, electronics, pharmaceutical products, but it carries over to work that we've done with commercial publishers and government education as well. And that's another exciting area of this structured writing technology that's emerged around it, is we're finding that people are using it all over the place, not just for traditional technical publications. So, when we look at monitoring content quality, we see that there's really 3 different dimensions that had been looked at over time. People concerned with, maybe not in technical publications group, but outside of reducing cost and monitoring how much reuse in there, so you can reduce the amount of cost for typesetting, for reviewing, for editing, for translating content. It's really a key driver in a lot of bringing in new systems. There's also speed based content management workflow systems, monitor processes and workflows, and look at the time that a document is spent in each state it goes out. And there's been tons and tons of talk about reducing costs and increasing cycle time. But now people are starting to look that, okay, well, we've done as much as we can to reduce the cost. There's only 3 of us here, and we're cranking these really quickly. But now the shift has been to look at, well, how good is the documentation? And so if we look at the current state of CMS metrics, it's important to see that over the last 15, 20 years, there's really been a shift across all those, where before people were really making their content in CMS systems, the focus was primarily on system metrics. How many technical writers do you have? Back when you were typesetters, how many typesetters did you have? How many editors do you have? How many servers do you have? How many software licenses do you need for your desktop publishing environment? And all the move to XML or SGML was just to reduce cost. And people got that under control, and there was automatic publishing from PDFs, automatic push to early websites, and the costs were under control. But then the focus was, well, if you reduce your editorial team by 50%, you're still cranking out the same amount of material. You can imagine that time would be affected. And then people start asking, well, why is it taking so long? And now this big shift of getting content management software in place and pretty complex workflows and all this reporting that's in place around content workflows and optimizing the time that it took. That's been talked about for many years, and I think people understand that. And those two, the time and cost, is still primarily the drivers of most new systems that we see coming in. But over the last 5 years, as content has been pushed out to websites, mobile devices, even like embedded PDF, where we can get metrics on how often the documents are used, and there's even sometimes direct ratings and feedbacks and comments, we could start getting a sense of the quality of the documents based on the user feedback or the website hits, or how often a document is used, or how many questions that come in about a document. And that's really helpful. But it is indirect. It's hard to think, well, if there's can you write great documentation about an inferior product? People are not going to like the documentation if the product doesn't work the way it's supposed to. Or conversely, if you have a great product that works well, you could write pretty substandard documentation, and it's going to fly by. So that's really kind of the current state of where we are, where we understand very thoroughly about the cost and the time and monitoring that, and then we're starting to have some indirect metric content quality defined in terms of user metrics. But what's available now, and really the focus of the discussion and where we've been really interested internally exploring, is measuring content directly, coming up with querying your content to check for outliers, check for abnormalities, come up with business rules that go above and beyond it just being valid content, and monitoring it, just like you would a large decision support system. That when we've done work, insurance company, financial services, where they're querying large volumes of content. That technique, those technical tools, are now available for XML content. So, with that quick overview, I am interested, after we went through our introduction, to hear how many of you have, and obviously this is the first poll question, how many of you in your current environment have each one of these? How many of you are monitoring the cost in terms of the licenses, the throughput of documents themselves, the number of editors, the translation costs? How many of you have a workflow in place with content management systems? How many of you have user feedback on documents that are published? And how many of you have already ventured into this area that we're talking about? And so for us, we're into this area. We have usage metrics, and we have absolutely no process metrics other than things have to be done immediately. So I'll submit to that. So just to give kind of a picture of what each one of those views of content look like, and we're calling them system view, because you really have any software in place to monitor. You try to reduce the number of technical writers, reduce the number of reviewers, increase the number of users, increase the number of publications, increase the number of distribution channels. And the key is, how much can you squeeze out of a small group of technical writers? And there's tons of groups that we work with that are in that situation. And that's kind of like the first phase. You kind of optimize and you kind of stress out this small group where they're getting a tremendous amount of content out, and XML and DITA can help out with that. And there are monitoring tools that can help with that. And as we said before, if you can't squeeze anything more out of the cost, then you try to increase the throughput of the system. And then typically people move to a content management system that we talked about before. They put in a workflow, and then every step along the way they can come up with metrics. And the metric starts to look like reducing the publishing cycle time, the monitor the percent time spent on each state. This is where you start having reports coming out of what percent of your documents are past due, which percent of your documents are in the review state, and you usually try to increase the number of releases in any given period. Before, what's now is if you have the time and cost in place, we'll start looking at, well, how are the documents being used? And there are some pretty interesting things going on, and I would say it'd be interesting to see what their responses are. And I think everyone has system metrics in place. Most people are working on type of process metrics that might not be used. But this metrics is still kind of an exciting area where people are trying to figure it out. To allow comments to be seen publicly, do they go directly back to the technical publications? Do you allow users to make editorial changes? Kind of an indirect determination of the effectiveness of the document. We have lots of statistics based on web analytics that can show you a lot of insight to this. But there's a lot of questions unanswered. Just because somebody's reading your documentation and they can't use it, does that mean that it's not of high quality? Maybe the background of the person reading it isn't sufficient. Maybe there's just problems with the underlying product, and so you can't always determine how high, or you can't really measure directly the quality of the content by looking at those metrics. So what's to emerge is internally, and this was focused early on when it was very common to put together a set of writing rules, writing guidelines that would be worked to a very specific DTD, and the XML or HTML would be rolled out. But people, if they move over to standard like DITA, just because you have valid DITA doesn't mean that it's going to guarantee that it adheres to your writing guidelines. So you have these levels of quality. If you're working with XML, it has to be well formed. It has to be valid according to your DTD. But then we're seeing that there's another level of validation that needs to be put in place. That level of validation really is what put in your very specific, sometimes publication by publication, writing guidelines. And this is where you have things like, those of you that worked with DITA, you can put anything in the title. It doesn't matter if you put 3 words or the Pittsburgh address. And, number of ticks, we're referring to generically here. You can go down 6, 7, 8, 9 times in one document, and then the next document you have an average of 1. You can put tons of things in notes for the warnings. There's nothing that enforces consistency across your document in terms of the words that you use. In one document, you might have one writer writes a couple paragraphs, puts everything in tabular format, where another person represents the same type of information in graphics. And so for those of you that might come from aerospace and defense, this is built right into the S1000D standard. It's a standard that's analogous. Data modules are equivalent to DITA topics, but above and beyond the validation of the content, you have these rules that are put in. They're presented as XPaths, and it can either be enforced writing on a document-by-document basis. They can change on a document-by-document basis, or they can be run across your repository, and you can get statistics back on what % of your documentation adheres to these various standards. This is really where a lot of our interest lies around this topic. So you can imagine the kind of stereotypical view of a single source publishing model. This model has been in place for us for years and years. On the left-hand side, you have XML based editors, some type of content repository, which could be a soft system, it could be a file system. Then it pushes out to various devices and multi-channel publishing. What is that it can be the content repository, it could be the file system, or it could be a publishing server. The technology that's behind the scene is readily available by lots of different providers. But the approach that's important here is someone somewhere in the cycle, you have to index your XML so it's accessible via XQuery. Some content management systems allow for that directly. Sometimes you have to export it over to another server where it's indexed. And if you have that, then you can query on the element level. Many component content management systems allow you to run queries on a tick-based level, the metadata associated with the topic, all shared components. But to really gain insight into the hidden complexity of your content, you want to expose every element, every attribute, every word, every character in every element to these indexes. And the powers of computing right now and some of the indexing tools that are out there, you can put the equivalent of hundreds of megabytes of XML, thousands of pages, index them, and you get some pretty meaningful results. The second part of this from a technical perspective, and it's not really a technology discussion, is once you have this data kind of extracted from the XML, you feed it to analysis tools that already exist. Oracle has business intelligence tools, for as far as I can see, but there's simple tools that are available, and the two that we use are the Office suites, either put into a relational database so it can be read by Access. You can send out different alerts or calendars, or a cloud environment where pushing it out to Google Apps, and then we can query it using their analytics tools. And so what we're seeing today is the work we do, and just technical publications are training. We use XML for writing data. We store it into a repository that we use based on an XML indexing tool called XIST, and the XQueries that extract metadata that feeds them dynamically into Google Apps, and they show them in their visualization tools. And it doesn't really matter the tools that you use, other than there's two key architectural points here. One is whatever you're storing your content in has to be indexed and accessible via XQuery, so you can get down to the element level. And then there's so many great analytic tools out there that you just format your resulting report so it can feed into these other environments. Before we go into anything specific, the next polling question what we have is, everyone's concerned about quality, and the way that it's enforced right now, it'd be interesting to hear across the group how many of you, and Avi, this is the second poll question that comes up. How many of you use informal review to capture these kind of as needed? How many of you has writing or style guidelines? How many use XML-based structured authoring to catch these, and you rely on just the DD? Have actually worked with some programmatic QA using XQuery like what we're showing? How many of you have no enforcement? And for our group, we're a bunch of technology guys, so we, and you see in our reports, we query back our database going back 10 years. We have no writing guidelines, no editorial review other than a person writing it. We do use XML-based structured authoring, and just introduce programmatic QA. Kind of skipped over the kind of the important thinking thread, and we just went into technology solutions. So, going back to the types of questions that you can ask is, you have to put a little bit of thought into what to define a high-quality document. And, we find this in terms of what we want to do. You figure if we have a list of dozens or hundreds even things that we don't want to happen in our documentation, the end result will be good documentation. We have the DTD there to ensure the general structure, and then we put in all these things. So we don't want our topics to be nested more than 4. We don't want to use more than 7 words in a title. We want to have a controlled list of warnings. We want our ratio between graphics and tables for our documentation to be roughly 1-to-1. We don't want any of our graphics not to titles. And we emphasizing like full paragraphs, and we want our list to be less than 7. So these are things that we came up with. When the results come back, and it's exactly what we'd expect. I don't know if you can see the poll results, but the highest percentage of people use writing guidelines. Half the people use editorial review. In between a third and a half use XML writing, and then the smallest group are kind of on the ends of the spectrums, which is a kind of advanced programmatic way, or on the other spectrum, there's therefore whatsoever. And it's good to see that distribution, because it kind of reflects what we see out in the industry. And it shows how we're a little bit different internally. So here is what the outputs typically look like, and we'll show how some of this looks. And this is against our database, and we had no idea that this was going on. But even with this, we call these kind of aggregate reports. Day by day, we can check the productivity of our editing group and even our developers by how many topics are added to our database. We have almost 700 topics in there, and it's a good representation. For the group, the type of work that we do, it's about right. But you can already gather insights the way that we write, some good and some bad. We have 90% of our technical documentation is in the first level topic. Our first level topic. We don't use it very much, and I think that's probably a good pattern. We don't have anything that's 4 levels deep. But a question that's asked of us is, what should be the distribution of topics, first tasks, first concepts, first references? And it depends. It depends what you're writing. If you're writing installation guides, procedural guides, you might have a disproportionate amount of tasks. If you're writing actual guides or training, there might be more concepts. Or obviously, writing reference guides, there might be more. But you can see, as a tech writing team, we probably rely more on generic topics more than we this. We'll talk to how we look at old lists and topics are good candidates for things that could tasks. Figures, we have 90 figures across our documentation, but you can already see that 91 of them actually have the images in there. So you're catching some problems in the data. And you see the number of paragraphs and the number of notes. And this gives a good cross-section of what's going on, and it's updated dynamically. But then start getting into things that become more important. And this is more the content metrics that are meaningful to us that we start looking at. Some of the things we want to start looking at are the average topic length, the minimum topic length in terms of characters, in terms of words. When we work for a couple telecom companies, they were kind of fixated on this, and it came back from way back in their history. They did a lot of analysis to see, how long should a list be? If it's 1 or 2, you're kind of wasting time by carving it out, and if it's 9 or 10, it's too much information. And they did a lot of work on this, and it all came back to, and we use it internally, the number 7. A lot of times, the number of words in a title, number of elements of a list, becomes less and less readable once you ask 7. It came from a lot of work that they did to decide, where to stop with the telephone codes. Everyone remembers their 7-digit telephone number before you had to tack on the and we see that actually materialize in the content as well. There's kind of a disproportionate number of our lists that have 6, 7, or 8 items in there. So you can see where we start putting in our business rules that want to be validated on top of this. And so, obvious things. We don't want any topics without IDs. We don't want any images without XREFs. We've in the last year or so started enforcing topics that have prologues, so you can still see there's a high percentage that don't have those. But we don't want any empty bolds, which are allowed in the standard. We don't want any empty paragraphs or empty entries sometimes. Okay. So when there was a question about the previous slide, when they talk about levels, are they mean it within the DITA map or a folder within the CMS? And it's a question, because this is not looking at the structure or any way that is stored within a content repository. This is looking at the content that's been published. And so we do it is we take every approved topic and every approved, and you'll see some of our other queries that there's lots of topics that don't belong to a DITA map, but it doesn't really matter where it comes from or the structure inside. And so again, this is the quality of measuring the content, quality of the material that's been pushed out to customers, not the way that it's stored and organized and referenced internally. So, and in fact, it doesn't, this one in particular, if you know about XQuery, it's not necessarily looking at the nested topic refs in DITA map. Oftentimes we'll write a topic within a topic, and even though just top level topic is referenced from a DITA map. So be very careful about embedding topics in other topics where only the highest level one is referenced. The point here is everyone should come up with their own set of rules that work internally. And really, there is no kind of step-by-step rules that applies to everybody. And depending on who your audience is, depending how they're reading it, depending on the educational level, whether they speak English as a first or foreign or second language, whether it's read off paper or off devices, the metrics that you come up with to optimize your content, we found has been very, very, very different. So where does these metrics come in play? We'll go through a couple of where we've used these these metrics. Underlying purposes of moving to a DITA-based or XML-based system is reduce cost. How do you do that? Well, if you can increase content reuse, it's pretty good and accepted that you're reducing the amount of redundant work. And so it's not as though you're going to implement reuse. It's not like no reuse, going from unstructured frame or kind of word-based environment, and you suddenly have all this reuse. It is something that's a gradual process. When you put in it, a lot of times we go through a conversion, and the content is suitable to be reused. It should be, but there's various aspects of it that's written that it's not suitable for immediate reuse. And so the whole of this is you have to think about these type of metrics when you apply to reuse in two ways. First off, reuse doesn't really mean anything. There's three distinct ways content can be reused. One is conditional tasks. We kind of have variables of words or phrases being toggled on and off, where none of the content is the same, and just little phrases are switched, maybe the different product names popping up on and off. There's repurposing of topics across content. That's the most popular one. Profiling, where you kind of filter on and off sections or tables or images based on foreign language, based on product. And each one of those has their own benefits. And I guess the one that's not listed here is kind of multi-channel publishing. If you automatically publish all your PDF to the web, that's reusing all of it. But you can see that the idea of reuse has to be broken down into how they're implemented, and then each one of these can be tracked. And we'll show how, if you want to, how many conrefs are in your database. You just get through all the attributes that use a conref or that's been referred to by a conref. Those are both fairly straightforward XQueries that can be used. Repurposing, IDs of the topic refs, and all of your data maps, and the profiling you can query off of the number of your attributes that are used for profiling. And so, that allows you to, over time, start with a baseline, and you can show after 6 months you started with 30% reuse, then it went on to 6% reuse, and it went on to 90% reuse. A question that came up: a topic has a time limit. How do you balance the expiry period with a topic of the futuristic hope of reuse? So there's two parts of that question. One has to do with the fact that each one of these snapshots, queries can be run at given intervals, and you can capture these snapshots and then run queries off of the reports. So, for instance, if you ran this once a day, you can see trends in the number of XREFs that are being used. That's how we like to use reuse content that's outside of our repository. And if you do it correctly, these topics will pop up in the report, and they'll reuse when valid, and then when expiry time limit, then they'll drop off, and you'll lose that reuse. So we've been able to accommodate that pretty easily. The whole point is, though, and it goes back to the levels of CMS, expiry dates and the other data should be pushed out to the content itself. We like to push as much metadata that we can query off in the content itself, and so then it can be used for the reports. So, the last polling question we have is, I'm just curious about reuse, and for those of you that are using, maybe not even using XML, because there's ways of accommodating some of these with Frame and other editors. And obviously, this is the third polling question. How you are realizing reuse through conditional tasks, through repurpose of content, cut profiling, or multi-channel publishing? And for us, we do a ton of component repurposing. That's most of this. And everything we do is push out to multiple devices. I guess technically we do some profiling, but it's a small percentage. We don't do any references in our environment. So that's the first case, and it comes up all the time. People about reuse, and amusing to me when people say, yes, we're reusing our content. That means nothing until you break it down to the categories of reuse, and you have a baseline metric, and you track the reuse over time. That's really where the interesting work comes in. Second, and this use case comes up, is where you have a very specific of how you want your documentation to act, and those rules can't be accommodated for in DTD, where if you want a certain number of rules, a certain number of character limits, you want a certain number of items, maybe you want a certain number of words to be used in certain syntax. Sometimes you might want to start all of your install guides with a gerund, like installing, and there's specific pick list of words that you use. That can't easily be done in the DTD, and some of the rules you just can't do with Schema or DTD at all. And even if you could, it wouldn't be worth the overhead of coming up with a custom DTD and deviate from and being able to use all the tools that are kind of built around DITA. So this is a great paper that was published 50 years ago that came across my desk a year or so ago. It was from Hughes Aircraft, and at first I thought, what are these guys? What about their work applies now when the technology is so different? And it's worthwhile reading, going through it. But there's 2 points I wanted to bring up. One was, if we make a mistake pushing something onto a website, even if it's a grammatical it's very easy for us now to kind of retract it. It's very easy to go from the editorial cycle to the review cycle and back again. There's no cost there. And we're spilled. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, it was very expensive to go from writing, it was down on paper, it was transcribed, then it was typeset, then it was viewed, and you have to go through that process. So there's a lot of thought into optimizing the quality of content because they got it wrong. It was very, very, very expensive to fix. And two aspects of it. One is they came up with this rationale called sequential thematic organization of publications, which is basically just topic-based editing. And it's amazing how kind of independently kind of this work to come up with DITA and topic-based editing materializes in old research papers and also in other standards like 1000D. But the point is, they thought that the visual representation of information was optimized in exactly the way you see it here. They thought basic considerations, if you couldn't write content where it could be displayed on pages and opening up, it was too complex. If you couldn't find it in terms of, and you can see they use their gerunds here, converting in a title, a overview, paragraphs, every topic had to have exactly one figure, and the figure had to have a caption with it. And this was the model of their documentation that they wanted to use over and over again. And if you want to follow, each title has less than 5 words, each one starts with the gerund, it would be very, very difficult and not worthwhile to write a DTD to accommodate this. But the point is, every group should come up with these rules of exactly what's the best way to optimize and display their content on a mobile device, on a website, on a printed page, and then many of those rules can't be enforced in DITA. So this is where these content metrics come into play because it allows you to monitor those. The third, and we'll just go through one more, and then we'll go through a couple of examples of how this runs. Four is, what's your view of productivity? When you look at system view way back when, you had your group of 5, 6, 10 writers, just how many documents could you crank out to reduce the cost? Process view, once you have the workflow, you try to reduce the time in each editing task. The usage view, in terms of activity, the effectiveness of the documents, most hits, high ratings. But content view, it doesn't matter how many documents are out. It doesn't matter how much time you spend. It doesn't matter if there's a popular document because a product has some flaws or a problem with release. You can start monitoring the percent of time that you spend on content as a ratio of the overall content repository. So if you spend 3 weeks working on a set of warnings that are used across all of your content documentation, that's much more productive use of somebody's time than someone cranking out 30 or 40 pages in that same time span. So we start using these metrics to start looking at productivity in ways that you couldn't have done before. And the last way is it comes back to our first presentation in terms of getting DITA projects approved. It's quantifying the return on investment of this technology. If we go back to the Conref DITA maps and profiling, you can imagine if we have a baseline of the number of Conrefs used in the system, the number of that are reused across DITA maps, the number of attributes that are used for profiling, and you see 6 months later, those numbers increase. A year later, those numbers increase. We had some success talking to people that don't really care about technical publications, that they look at tech pubs as kind of just a cost center they want to reduce, is using a form like this where whatever is spent on your system implementation, initial return on investment calculation, as you look at the benefit of the system minus the cost of the system, you get that ratio. But the benefit of the system you can look at is what the cost of current operations are by the reuse factor. And if there's a 10% increase in reuse, even if you're spending the same, you're producing 10% more documentation, and that can be equated into actual dollars that are typically accepted. The fact we put in here is, without exception, your plan for reuse as you enter into a system like this, almost, with exception, falls below what you think the reuse is. So you have to have some scalability factor. So you'll jump into the reports that we use, but the last two tools that we use, one is statistical analysis. Everyone's taken some statistics in high school or college, and there's lots of different distribution curves, and we're not going to go into all of them. But the simple one that everyone knows is normal distribution, and basically this picture, this normal distribution, is your friend. And if you start running reports across your database and start coming back when you graph them, they look like this, chances are you're in the right spot. So for instance, look at the length of titles. Should be a few really short ones, 1 or 2 words. There should be some that are 10 or 15, but most of them should fall around, as we said before, 6 or 7 words. They should fall across something like this. There's a ton of outliers. If you see like 10% of your documentation has basically long paragraphs as titles, or any statistic, if they have 20, say a disproportionate number of your graphics falls into 5 different topics, you should get those topics, because even if they're better, it's this is another thing that we get at. It's better to be consistent across your documentation than it is to be perfect in one and not so good in the others. So, and the last is we've had this is exactly where the work is right now. Once you've normalized your content, you have these queries, you start putting them into reporting tools that have been around forever for business intelligence, for database reporting, for web analytics, and you can start reporting on a lot of things that are pretty impressive. So we're in 10 minutes, so we'll look at our system, and please remember, we are first and foremost system integrators. We write content, and we're just learning about optimizing our content. But everything that we do, whether it's training, white papers, project documentation, everything we use is in DITA now. It's converted over. We use XML, and we publish over to a system called Exist for our XQuerying. And then in this case, we write XQueries that put them into Google spreadsheets for analysis. And to show a simple example of how this works, repository, which is our website, the port that it comes out, you can query a whole library or a particular document, and then we have those statistics that we looked at before. So on our website, we do some masking, but each one of these, quote-unquote HTML pages it's an underlying XML where we run a kind of dynamic XLT to produce it. We just call it HTML for search engine optimization. As you can see here, there's XML, there's 2 ordered lists talking about the key benefits, and there's a couple of paragraphs in there. Let's look at the analytics. Across one document, there's one XREF, which topic, title length is 6, there's only one of them. We look at the content alerts. Well, this topic, they have a prologue, and there's 2 empty paragraphs in there that we probably just put that in, for spacing purposes, which we'd want to go in and fix. There's no way of telling that by looking at this. An empty paragraph is allowed by DITA and has some formatting fits. But that we want to test, and we've been occurrences of those empty paragraphs, we correlate to low quality of documents. But if we look across our whole database, you can see that it queries pretty quickly, and it goes back to the 33 maps, the 1874 topics, the number figures, and we look at all this, and I'm sure there's a ton of that we should be fixed if we didn't have to do with developing putting in new systems. There's some test content that we have. We did some prototyping, other libraries, and you can see it goes through pretty quickly, calculating, and it fills these all out. So we pulled in 3 maps for another company of 258 contents, and then you can see it's the characteristics of that is very different. They have all their images outside of figures. Most they have close to 1 ratios between images and tables. And so the nice thing about this, every time we put in a library, it goes out, queries the XQuery, normalize it so it be fed into a spreadsheet so we can look at it. And those aggregate metrics are looked at every single day. But we looked at the statistical analysis. This gets into another example of things that you can do pretty easily. This math is all of our B. I'm particularly concerned about our emphasis. We shouldn't be emphasizing tons of things. They should be. If we look at here, this is the average number of words, 3. I guess okay. Then average number of characters, 17. And then you look at each occurrence across our whole database of any time a B was used. This is an emphasis. And it counts the number of words, 2, it counts the number of characters, and then it determines the frequency of that number across the whole database. So the whole point is, then that can be graphed pretty easily. And not the normal distribution that we want to see, but it's slanted towards 1 or 2. Fine. It's exactly what you'd want to see for Bs. But if you look at something like, let's look at titles. We run through this. It does its querying, and there's 3 words, 20. So it's same number of words, a little bit longer. But this is more what you'd like to see. So this type of querying is a smile to your face. That normal distribution is a type of thing that you should see. So the question came up: can you describe the type of metadata that can be the metadata of the files that can facilitate the XQuery? And the important thing here, it's not the metadata of the files. We're querying any element, any attribute in the documents themselves. And so it was a tremendous advantage if you move to a component content management system to have your topic or section stored in the repository, having metadata. You can query flow information about it, all this metadata external to the topic, you can query on it. The other thing here is we're extending that querying to the content itself. And that's really where we find that there's a tremendous amount of advantage of being very consistent with the way you use emphasis across all of your documentation, the way you use titles across all your documentation. If you wanted to look at every list item that we've used across all of our documentation, you can see it. Think for a while. There's more of them, but this is where they are. For better or worse, you can see what we were charging. That this is our database. This is our live environment, and it allows you to monitor that. You can see things like having some across some and using sometimes commas or something that we could work on. So this allows us to analyze your content in slices that you've done before, and it's pretty powerful. So the last thing is, after you look at the distribution metrics, inevitably you'll find problems, and then find things where we want to come up and just analyze every use of. Well, let's just see how the notes are in our database. And so this is an example of it. Pulls up each note, we wanted to update that particular note out of context, you have to be careful of this, but a lot of times you can fix things out of context in this. It'll allow you to edit one element at a time across your whole document set. You can approve it, not approve it. And this is an example here of we have APIs into terms of memory vendors. To be truthful, that the Japanese and the German, I think, are just going through a web service provided by Google. But Spanish is coming through our database. And again, we don't have tens of thousands. We have thousands of topics. If we wanted to look at every title, the translation available, and we have the available to change. And so, how we use this is, we're figuring out new ways internally every single day. But the main purpose is we close out of the discussion to start thinking about your content, not much as documents, not so much as content components, but looking at ways where every element can be queried, repackaged, sent to statistical analysis, sent to translation memory on an element-by-element basis. And the technology's out there where you can do it pretty quickly. So, at this point, that's all the information I wanted to cover. If there are any questions, you can pose them now. I think we'll take a few. There are a minute or two. If we have to go longer, I think Avi will close out the discussion right at top of the hour, and I'll answer any questions, kind of offline. And again, there's a ton of information here that an hour and went through it pretty quickly. So if you have any questions, you could either our website or Joe's website, xmetal.com. There'll be a copy of this going through it. And in particular, if you're finding any standard rules for forcing content standards on an element level in your content data sets that are helpful for you, I'd be very interested to hear more about it. Okay, and then there was one question. They wanted to look at this, the one which was the productivity. Again, the system view, the process view, and the usage view is in common. What we're starting to work on internally and try to find new usage for is the weighted percentage of work that someone does across your whole repository. Okay, so I think that's it.
Yeah. Just thank you for time to share all your thoughts on this presentation. Thank you to everyone who asked for help. Beneficial, and you learned everything and got everything you wanted out of it. Just as a reminder, I'll be sending out a link to the recording of this, and it will be available on our website at xmetal.com/webinars. Please know that we're available for additional questions. Like Brian said, we'll stick around a bit after, and you can always send myself or Brian an email, and we will answer any outstanding questions. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.